Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk Astrology. In today's episode, we're talking about out-of-bounds planets and a tendency here towards extreme behavior. So whether that's skilled or unskilled, whether that's boundless creative innovation or borderline criminal and antisocial behavior, these are the kind of themes and topics we're going to be talking about today. Joining us, we have our esteemed faculty member, Stevie Lowe. So thank you so much for joining us today, and how are you doing?
Hi, it's good to be here with you, Cal. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. So in this episode, like I say, we're going to be looking at famous chart examples. And Stevie, I know you've brought your chart example of your own out-of-bounds planet, as well as my own. But first, we're going to talk about a little bit about the astronomy first, about what we're talking about and what we mean when we're talking about out-of-bounds planets. So Stevie, I know in 103, you talk about declination and you teach this in the Kepler courses. So what are we talking about when we're talking about out-of-bounds planets and in terms of declination?
Declination is basically the aspects in latitude. So we are generally used to seeing aspects with planets going through signs and their relationship to where they are to one another throughout the signs. But the declination, which is connected to the parallel, contraparallel ideas here, are when the planets are above or below the horizon of the ecliptic, either north or south of the equator in relationship to the sun. So the sun is basically the anchor point in the solar system, and it has a moderate travel span. When we see a planet out of bounds, it is basically far away from the sun in terms of the latitudinal relationship of traveling.
Excellent explanation. And to me, I always think about the analogy, thinking about the sun being a parent, and you've got these planets going around. I find it fascinating that Saturn always stays within the bounds, never goes out of bounds. So that's the planet of rules and restriction. Then you've got Mars, Moon, Mercury, Venus going off. And when the parent's not looking, it's like, let's go out and party and let's go out of bounds. That's think about going wild.
Yeah. And especially with the moon, Mercury, and Venus and Mars, well, Mercury and Venus, they never travel too far away from the sun specifically. So when we use declination, it gives us that bit of edge that we can't really get to say, yes, I am going wild, I am going far away from you. You're never going to have Mercury opposite the sun, but you can have Mercury contraparallel, Mercury out of bounds, which means that there is this disconnected, like you said, parents aren't watching piece that you don't get with a typical aspect.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the most common bodies to go out of bounds, as you've been speaking to, Stevie, is Mars, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and we've got the outer planets, Pluto and Uranus. So even when we say common, some of these planets aren't really that common in terms of the wider picture. So I don't know if our video is obscuring the chart on the right-hand side, but it's got the percentages here of how long the planets are out of bounds for in all the moments. So we've got Moon 15%, Mercury at 13%, Venus at 12%, Mars at 17% of the time. Jupiter very, very rarely out of bounds, only 1%. And then the outer planets, Uranus and Pluto, at 8% and 10% respectively. And again, Saturn, obviously the sun never goes out of bounds, the lunar nodes, Saturn, Neptune. And if you want to use the asteroids as well, Chiron does not go out of bounds. But again, Saturn is quite interesting because it is the planet of rules and restrictions. So that's staying in the parent's eye line in that case. So that's a good point. Just want to touch on a bit of history here. So actually, who's credited with coining this term out of bounds is K.T. Bauer, who wrote a book on declinations, if anyone wants to find that online, which is very interesting. And of course, the brilliant Stephen Forrest, who took this concept even further. I don't know, Stevie, if you've watched Stephen Forrest's video on particularly the out of bounds moon online, but it's, do you know when you're learning astrology and you pick up a topic and you just have that aha moment, and then you research your own chart and your declinations, and you go, holy, this makes so much sense.
Yeah, totally. And that's why out of bounds or declination in general is it's one of the modern techniques that I have held on to, because it just adds this little layer that you don't get with a typical longitudinal aspect line. So it does add a bit of nuance. It does add a bit of just further detail to how these planets operate differently in each chart of individuals.
Absolutely, absolutely. And before you touched on parallel and contraparallel, which get a lot of great information there as well, but we'll probably leave that we'll do that for another episode. So now we're just concentrating on the outer bounds. So let's now talk about interpretations. Now, I know we both have outer bounds planets ourselves. So for you, Stevie, what are some of the key words that come to mind when we're talking about outer bounds? What kind of words or feelings come to mind when we're talking about the qualities or the interpretations of outer bounds planets?
Definitely rogue, independent, erratic. I like the outlaw piece that you have here on the page. Things like that, just eccentric, another one. So unique is definitely the anchoring point there.
Yeah, I think those are some excellent keywords. And it really is, I think another one I've been thinking about as well, and I've heard it said before, is kind of like being an outcast, because I found in my own life, also in my chart, if you delineate that chart separately, but I look at declination and some of the planets there, I've always felt like a bit of an outcast, a bit of a rebel, a bit out there. And I think you've talked about the same of being in that same situation where, fitting into social constructs or fitting into certain types. And this is only a hunch, but I have a kind of a hunch that I would say many astrologers, maybe on the whole, maybe some of them have outer bounds planets. Again, that's just, I've got no evidence to back that up, but it's just a hunch I have that you probably might find a lot of astrologers with outer bounds planets, because of course astrology as a subject still not, even it's tapping now into the zeitgeist with the younger generations, it's still not a topic that's widely accepted. So it makes me wonder if by and large we have many astrologers with outer bounds planets. I don't know.
Yeah, and it really does put a wrench in the system of society. Basically, it teaches us how to act independently of our circumstances, which is the most kind of outlaw thing that we can do as people living together.
I think that's a wonderful description. Again, that outlaw. So on the screen here, we're talking about, this is Stephen Forrest's work, who chose 9 qualities, more referring to the outer bounds moon qualities, which I believe Stephen said he found is the most extreme. Going back to that word again, extreme. So, being the nice outlaws or the zany characters, and breaking, for me, certainly personally, breaking out of social constructs of, I was born, I lived on a council estate in, a very poor part of England. So I wasn't expected to go off to university and travel abroad and do all these things. So breaking out of those social constructs, I think is quite interesting, and choosing to leave and all these different things. And I love Stephen's quote on here. I think it's absolutely brilliant. So if anyone wants to check that out, certainly if you haven't, go and check out his work of Stephen Forrest on this particular topic. And I put down at the bottom here just a side note. So the charts we're looking at today are mainly natal charts. We're looking at outer bounds planets, but I would say pay attention to the progressed planets outer bounds. So the progressed moon. Do you do a lot of work that in 103, Stevie? Do you use the progressed declination?
We don't do too much because we like to save that for the movement courses. So definitely look out for that in our movement courses more so. But we definitely talk about just the relationship of declination to out of bounds planets and or parallel, contraparallel, and how we can use those not only in natal charts, but also in horary examples and things like that. Little things like an out of bounds planet signifying something in a horary chart will just give you that extra edge that you're like, oh, this moon is out of bounds. Is this question? We have to look a little bit deeper into this question, maybe.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, you do some absolutely fantastic work. So again, just a side note, pay attention to progressed moon in particular. So you might say to yourself, oh, if I look at my declinations on my software, I don't have any planets out of bounds. But if you look at your progressions, sometimes you might have that moment where it comes out of bounds. But talking about future out of bounds planets, so even if you don't have out of bounds planets natally or progressed at the moment, we're all collectively going to experience out of bounds planets. So on the left-hand side here, you'll see the moon. So we are actually in a moon cycle phase where we do have the moon going out of bounds. So today is September 10th, and we do have, fittingly, the moon out of bounds today and into tomorrow. And then it'll come back within bounds and then go back out again on the 20th. Now, in this roughly 18-year cycle, the moon for around 9 years will never be out of bounds. So you'll have a bunch of people born in those years where we'll have no out of bounds moons at all. And then there'll be another period of 9 years where there'll be lots of people with out of bounds moons. And of course, but even within those 9 years, you can have people come back within the bounds there. We've also got Mercury coming up in November and be leaving in December. So this is Mercury out of bounds. We have Mars entering in late December and leaves in January of 2024. And we've got Venus coming in out of bounds in June of next year, 2024. So again, talking about this as a collective feel, even if you don't have them personally out of bounds planets in your own chart, like let's just take Mars, for example. So say we're coming near to Christmas and you're traveling, if you celebrate that holiday, you're traveling and you're in the car, maybe you'll find more maybe aggressive behavior on the road, or, you know, it's got the martial qualities. What do you say, Stevie, that when we experience planets out of bounds?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And as much as they affect the natal individual, they affect the weather as well. So looking at that, Mercury enters November 6, 2024. That's exciting for the election.
Oh, you know what? I didn't even see that. Let's see. So Mercury, where did you say?
November 6, 2024.
Oh, wow. I didn't even notice that.
So that right away is like, oh, that's near election time. That's going to be very interesting.
That's going to be very, very interesting around that time. Yeah, that's a good spot.
Or we might enter another kerfuffle.
Exactly. Yeah, another. Oh, we don't need that. I've lived in the States now for on and off 10 years, so we don't need any more drama. So I hope it goes one way more than another, but I'll leave the politics out of it for today until we get to one of the charts. So anyway, so when I was putting this presentation together, I've got a lot of ideas. Do you ever get that time when you're in bed and it's that space between going to sleep and just like half awake? So I was thinking about the out of bounds planets, and I was thinking about pulling up famous charts. And one of the people I was thinking to myself, if I was to go and have a beer with someone, or someone that might put me a little bit on edge, it was just Shia LaBeouf. It just came into my mind. So I thought to myself the next day, right, I'm going to go and check out his chart and see if we have any out of bounds stuff going on. And remarkably, not just like one planet, we've got a whopping 3 out of bounds planets, quite extreme declinations. And we've got one in yellow here. So even though it's not technically out of bounds in terms of the definition, I would say if the planets are getting close to those high declinations, that it still has some of those effects. So what are your thoughts, Stevie, on this blew my mind when I pulled up his chart. So
yeah, that blew my mind too, but it makes a lot of sense because I mean, almost in every area of this guy's life, he is a rule breaker, and there's not just one part of him that is extreme, it's all of him.
It's almost like it's steroids, because if you just take his chart in isolation, and what you see here, this is all in whole sign, by the way, so we can look at quadrant charts. Some of those planets will move into the 11th and the 10th, but we've got whole sign up here. So even if we were just looking at this chart in isolation, you know, we've got that Sun part out opposition within 19 minutes of Uranus, so that applying opposition as well. So that Uranian quality, that erratic behavioral quality. You've got the Venus, we've got the Venus out of bounds and the Moon in the opposition to Mars. We've got a whole T-square there with the nodes. We've got the Moon square Pluto. There was so much going on in this chart that could indicate, to me at least, a lot of eccentric or extreme behavior. So we didn't even have to look at the declinations. But as soon as we go to the declination and we see that the Moon, Mercury, Mars, all out of bounds, it kind of, for me, puts like steroids on top of his erratic nature, and yeah. So when I pulled it up, I was like, this makes complete sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we see with him, the Moon rules his Venus, Mercury rules his Sun, Mars rules his 10th house. So his out of bounds planets are very influential in the chart. They're not also just kind of one-offs that don't affect anything. They're integral to his essence and being.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make there. And, you know, that Mars out of bounds, you know, that erratic behavior, and you know, whole sign, we've got it in the 12th here. So you know, a lot of his behavior has been his self-undoing, because I think he's been arrested a couple of times. So you do have that incarceration piece, I think, with that Mars. And again, these, as you pointed out, these general connections, the Moon Venus-Mercury connection. So just a couple of examples we've got here on the screen is allegations of domestic abuse, kicked out of a Broadway show for extreme, like just yelling. Then that's that Mercury out of bounds, just yelling at the people on the stage. Apparently chased a homeless man through the street. So again, more erratic behavior, threatening people at restaurants, like threatening to have the patron killed. And one of the most extreme things here, which I thought was just mind blowing, took out one of his teeth and scarred his face. I mean, wow. Just talk about extreme erratic behavior, and fitting in with all what we're seeing here is really quite mind blowing.
Yeah,
chart.
Totally agree. Those are great points. And,
yeah,
you have the yellow pointing to Venus there because Venus is somewhat heading towards out of bounds declination there. Venus is opposite Mars. So yeah, it makes so much sense that we would kind of also just include that yellow and just like really take a note about the allegations of domestic violence and slash the 6th house, 12th house relationship of confinement and his, I mean, obvious, at least issue with mental health, substance abuse, and things like that. So the Venus, even though it's in yellow, I think it's still veering away from the sun enough in declination, especially when in that relationship with Mars, where it really does make a big statement in the chart.
Absolutely. And great point about pulling out there. And that's why I wanted to put in the yellow here, and that I don't think it's a definitive line. So saying, say you have your Mercury, for example, at 23, 25, and that you're just at that cusp, then I wouldn't say, oh, well, you're going to have no effect of any out of bounds effect. Like, I don't think it's, I think when we get to, I think Stephen Forrest said this as well, once you start getting to those extreme declinations, north or south, I mean, I think we're finding those qualities as well. And as you pointed out, Stevie, that real tight opposition with that Mars, I mean, we're a degree separating, but just such, as you said, such a strong signature in the chart. And if you relate that possibly to the domestic abuse allegations and dealing with his partners in a violent way, seems to be part and parcel of his character as well, sadly. So again, we're talking about this out of bounds behavior in a negative sense, in an unskilled way in this chart.
It really is kind of like a struggle. It's that's why we're so interested in this, because it's like there's a personal drive that you really have to like take a step back from and evaluate in the third person with your out of bounds planets. Which we kind of know in our own lives. And I don't know if maybe that would help Shia in his life, but it's a personal drive that is so inherent inside of you that it's not like, you're obviously have, this obvious, oh, my planet is a detriment or exalted, and there's this obvious set of rules around that. It's more of, I'm just doing my thing, boom. And you really have to fine tune, why is this opposition so different than other Venus-Mars oppositions? And one piece to that in this case is the declination.
Absolutely. And such a wonderful point you're making there as well about honing in and that self-awareness. So if you do, anybody watching, have planets out of bounds, as you're saying, Stevie, that element of self-awareness. So even though you're going to have to operate with these out of bounds planets, maybe that self-awareness is going to help you move forward and how to maybe mitigate maybe some of those extreme qualities of what's going on. So maybe obviously she is not probably aware. Interesting point you made as well about dignity. So I don't know in your research, certainly not mine, how much dignity affects the out of bounds planets, but maybe that's something that needs a bit more research.
Yeah. Well, for Shia, it's interesting about the tooth because his Mars is ruled by Saturn. So it's interesting because yeah, a regular person wouldn't do that. And also think about just infections, the shards, the fact that he could pull that off is very, oh, you have an exalted Mars, you can pull that off. Like
that's a really good point. Yeah, the fact that you pulled it off and like didn't end up
it's like I guess especially with the exalted, you get away with stuff that you're not supposed to get away with. Other people would be seriously harmed by this kind of behavior. This out of bounds element, but with dignity, kind of like you're still gonna do the crazy thing, that isn't like a stereotypical dignified Mars behavior, yet you're still going to come out of it with some dignity somehow.
I love that. I love that. You just blow my mind. I've not thought about it in that way before, but that makes sense. An element of dignity maybe with the planets, then maybe you come through still with the extreme behavior, but unscathed, so to speak, or like say, come through with some dignity. I think that's an excellent point.
Unlike his Mercury, which I mean, his Mercury, he's been in trouble for plagiarism as well. So
yeah, that's true.
Just an example of his Mercury doesn't work as well for him as his other out of bounds planets. I'm sure his moon has gotten him into a lot of trouble with that relationship stuff too.
That's a really interesting point, because that plagiarism scandal, he didn't come out clean as a whistle with that one. Yeah, I think he tried to manipulate the situation in terms of saying, oh, this is all a joke, or made some theater out of it. But essentially everyone was like, no, mate, you can't go around stealing other people's work. So that's a really good point. And again, that maybe that lack of position here, lack of dignity, as opposed to that Mars. So that's a really interesting point, I think. Okay, next on our next interesting character, someone who can't keep his mouth shut, it seems. And no surprise whatsoever, we have Donald Trump's Mercury out of bounds, and quite high here. We've got it 2509 in terms of declination, and we've got some yellow here, so we've got some quite high declination in terms of Moon and Venus. So Stevie, what are your thoughts when it comes to the infamous Donald Trump?
Yeah, there is so much to say about him. So the out of bounds Mercury is point on. I mean, the perfect call. Yeah, he's just gotten himself into all of the trouble on his own.
Yeah, and again, like I say, that honing in on that Mercury, even when he first came into the political eye in terms of running, so coming down the escalator, his first words were talking about, you know, Mexicans and derogatory terms and stuff, and just coming out with things that would kill any other political career. He's just coming out with this out of bounds Mercury, just saying the most extreme things going on. And again, I won't get into politics, but unfortunately, that kind of just saying it how he thinks it is appeal to a lot of people. So and again, you know, that Mercury is quite interesting. You've got that square to Neptune, so the fact he's told, which is a fact. I mean, I don't have to be political here, about the thousands of lies he's told over his tenure. I think, was it one of the papers that caught like 34,000 lies or something ridiculous? So we've got that out of bounds Neptune, that Mercury, out of bounds Mercury Neptune connection, just fiddling the facts and just trying to wheel and deal. And I think is quite apparent. So we've got some of that 12th house here in the whole sign. So whether that's his self-undoing, maybe like Mars was for Shia LaBeouf, is, you know, will this, you know, is getting himself out there and into trouble? Will it land himself in incarceration? Will he land himself ultimately in prison? I mean, he's already been booked in Georgia, so he's already had some of that 12th house going on. It'd be interesting to see if he finally, because of his running in his mouth for all these years, finally gets him into legal trouble.
Yeah, and we know like all of the things that he says out loud, but we can't even imagine the quiet part. The stuff that the information that he hasn't let come out is probably just mind-boggling.
That's a really point. That's got to be scary. If he's the stuff that we've heard, like, what are we not hearing? What
are we not hearing? And Mercury again here rules his sun and his second house. So there is extreme wealth as well as extreme verbal behavior. I mean, as well as extreme associations, and then his friends taking the fall for him in those associations so often as well.
That's a really interesting point about the connection of the outer bounds with the second house and that extreme wealth. That's a really interesting point in terms of the outer bounds and talking about declination. We've got that Mercury ruled in the 11th as well. So again, when you see him at these rallies, that's kind of his safe space where he's able to say the craziest he can come out with, and just like, it's like, for me, it's like verbal diarrhea, just says any crazy thing he wants to come out with. And for me, that's that 11th house component in front of his supporters, his groups of people, his people, where he can just come out with absolutely anything he wants to come out with. So, but yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, again, if we take the declination out of it, we've got some interesting signatures. Obviously, we've got Mars on an angle, we've got Mars on the ascendant. So that bravado, that Leo that bravado again is there. And we're, you know, up to a full moon here, that extra energy. So I think you could look at this chart in isolation and see a few things. But as you said before, Stevie, you start bringing in some of this declination, some of these out of bounds qualities, and you're like, it just reinforces what we're kind of talking about in just a general delineation.
And his is another great example where you put in the yellow, the moon and Venus both playing a role, Venus ruling the midheaven, the moon being in an eclipse, a lunar eclipse birth. So those almost out of bounds planets are still far enough in declination away from the sun to be odd, to be very odd.
Now, that's a really good point. So let's take that Venus, for example. So, still getting up there, not quite at 23 yet, 2249, but in terms of Venus, like just going for things that he wants. So obviously there's been many allegations against him from many women in terms of his past behavior. So I wonder if that some of all that extreme quality comes in with just saying, I want person, the very famous line he said before, which would kill any political career, was, grabbing them by, I won't say this on YouTube, grabbing them by the what.
Venus, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, grabbing, yeah. And that extreme quality coming into there, and the moon as well that you bring in. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah,
absolutely. So we'll see what happens with Mr. Trump, and I think me and Stevie will agree which way we want it to see it go, but we won't talk about it here. Okay,
on to the courtroom.
Okay, next we've got Judy Garland. So in terms of declination, out of bounds here, we've got Venus, and that Mars is quite high in declination there, nearly getting up towards 26. So what are your thoughts, Stevie, in terms of Judy Garland and out of bounds planets?
Wow, I mean, she's just got such an amazing story. So her Venus is so interesting that it's out of bounds on the ascendant there, because she's seen as so beautiful to all of us, but she was mistreated, called fat, called ugly. She was really, really short. And so it was said, even though she could be underweight, she would still appear to be curvy and bigger on camera. And so, from a very early age, she was given drugs to lose weight, to stay up, to be cheery. So I think Venus is definitely generally more moderate. We know Venus to be the moderate thing, and this thing is not moderate at all. She's not a classic beauty in a sense because of her extreme lifestyle that she lived. Always trying to be a classic beauty, but also having to work way harder to appear as classically beautiful than a lot of women in her day did, and being forced into drug use in order to carry that off.
And I think it's such a wonderful point, and I think it's such a sad story as well, because I think that Cancerian Venus nature as well maybe wanted to be loved maybe for herself and to have those comforts, and was she, I believe, married 5 times, I think, ultimately, and maybe searching or yearning for the connection with others. Obviously, we've got the Saturn rule in the 7th. There's other things that we can look at here, but yeah, really interesting point you bring up about that Venus, and maybe going for things that were ultimately harmful to her. You've got that Venus, the quincunx to Mars, the outer bound Mars. We've got that fairly wide trine. We've got that trine to Uranus. So for me, it felt like the things that she went after, things she used to desired, Venus out of bounds, just weren't helpful for her at all. As you said, like eventually getting into to alcohol and drugs, and dying, unfortunately, I think at an early age. I believe at 47.
Yeah, and she also, with her out of bounds Venus, is interesting because I don't think she really set out to do this, but she became a huge queer icon and still has a very loyal queer fan base, as well as I think 2 of her husbands were eventually openly gay.
Is that right? Oh, interesting. Yeah, and it being such an icon, that's a really interesting point. And again, that out of bounds quality as well. That's really quite fascinating. I think the Mars is interesting. I believe you were talking about childhood as well. I think she was overworked. So maybe that Mars out of bounds, overworked at a young age, and just maybe led to exhaustion. So maybe looking for outlet. I think she experienced severe depression. I know we've got the Moon Saturn thing, going on as well as other things going on in the chart. So it was, I think, just a real sad story for Judy Garland's case. And
Yeah, and this is
so
another good example of the kind of exaltation factor, because Saturn is exalted, but the ruler of Saturn is Venus, the out of bounds Venus. So there was something really broken in her home, even though it ushered her into celebrity and fame. But there was something really twisted about how that happened. It wasn't just you're ushered in with no qualms at all. You're ushered in, but now you have to deal with an abusive family member, being fed drugs. And then you have Mars opposite the sun, sun ruling the second, and she died basically penniless. She did not work with her money management well at all. So, I mean, after all of the work that she did, like 40 movies, or she was a triple threat, singer, dancer, actor, and she died poor almost. So that's just insane.
It's so real sad. And that's why I love astrology. As coming back to your point before about self-awareness, if you could help these people at an early stage, just go, you know, these are things that could manifest in your life, and just to be aware of them, and to speak to people before they get into these situations. But yeah, so very sad. So next we're on to your chart, Stevie. So tell us about your out of bounds and your experience.
Yeah, my Mars is out of bounds. It's played out in so many different ways over the years. Mine is a little bit what I like to call more inward than my sister's, because hers is approaching the ascendant. Mine is, as you see, separating, so it's in the quadrant 12th as opposed to the quadrant 1st. So crazy Mars stuff about me. I have given myself about 5 stick and poke tattoos. There's 2.
Oh, cool.
My sister and I were both into gymnastics and tumbling, so we were doing backflips and back handsprings and all kinds of whatever, you know, major athletics. My just overall kind of lust for life, I would say, to quote Iggy Pop. Definitely like Shia LaBeouf, I've done really dangerous things, but came out unscathed. So I kind of attribute that also to the exaltation factor of Mars.
You've got the dignity there, coming out unscathed. I love it.
Yeah, Mars is out of bounds, sex-dialing Jupiter, and I was a hitchhiker. I snuck on freight trains a couple of times. So there is some really dangerous Martian things that I've done that I just...
But you've came out, because that Mars is so strong. I mean, conjunct and angular, direct, exalted. I mean, it's your insect malefic as well. So the power of that Mars is, again, I think talking about the dignity is really quite interesting, and hearing your personal story about that. So doing really dangerous things, but being able to come through unscathed is really quite remarkable.
Yeah, we kind of touched a little bit on the other stuff. You mentioned, oh, it's related to your midheaven. How does that play out for you? So group organizing, working with Food Not Bombs, which is a program where you take donations, food donations from your local community, and then cook for homeless people. And you do that in a group week after week. Also, ruler of the Mars is in the 12th. So I've done prison to book projects and prison pen paling projects. So 11th house has definitely played a role. I've also done civil disobedience and lots of protesting. And I did end up in jail for protesting once. So
wow.
Yeah, there's a little 12th house.
Little 12th house in there.
12, 11, 1. Yeah, totally. Organizing with groups and getting locked up for.
But what I love about your story is it's the out of bounds quality, but for the good of society, like whether it's group projects, or the Food's Not Bombs, or, you know, working with, again, that ostracized people outside the margins of society, the out of bounds quality, but actually going out and doing protests, getting arrested for protests. You're actually using that martial quality and that strength, because that strength of that Mars, to actually help other people. So it's not like a an out of bounds selfish quality that we might see with, say, Donald Trump, where it's all for about his personal gain, all the rest of it. You're actually using these out of bounds quality to help other people in society, which I think is a beautiful manifestation of your out of bounds Mars in this case.
Yeah, totally. Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So let's actually, you've got your sister here, which we've got permission for us to use. So you are born, you and your sister, 4 minutes?
Yeah, 2 or 4.
Right. So again, explain. So you've got obviously the difference here with the Mars connection and the ascendant. So how is this manifested in both your lives in the differences?
My sister is so we both did gymnastics as kids, but she started to do competitive cheerleading. So she was doing the craziest flips. I was like low key flip. She was high key flip. She did what is called a full, which is you basically twist your whole body and then land on your feet, as opposed to my back flip. So she took everything I did up a notch a little bit, but she was also a little bit more of like a fighter spirit. So whereas I might give myself a tattoo or do something personal like that, she was a fighter. I mean, she was a brawler.
Wow. So it's more of that outward manifestation of the out of bounds Mars rather than yours is slightly more of an inward pull. So whether it's, tattooing yourself or doing things to that nature, she's out there actually physically battling to a certain degree.
She also loves motorcycles, like dirt bikes. So she was a dirt bike rider and off-roader, and basically all of the fun activity stuff she does is also extremely dangerous.
Is that right?
She's come out of it unscathed. There was one point where she tased herself just to see what it was like.
Wow. And I love that Mars on the ascendant as well is literally the physical body. Like, let's test this. But I love what you're saying with the dignity as well. It's like tasing herself. I assume she was okay.
It was okay, yeah. But yeah, it's like I have to be over and extra, and I want to see how far I can push my own body. It's really that conjunction with the ascendant, yeah.
Wow, this is why I love astrology, because some of the stories that you hear is just so to a T to the point of the astrology that we talk about. It just literally blows my mind, like literally tasing yourself and like coming out unscathed, but putting yourself through those extreme experiences. That's just incredible.
You would go out when I was like in high school. I would go out to the street, and my sister would be like on a bikini on this little dirt bike. Just it was like, what if you fall? You're gonna scrape your whole body up. You're in a bikini.
Oh my days! Just a bikini, hardly anything. I'm just cruising on a dirt bike. Wow.
So she is very fearless, definitely.
That's incredible. So I noticed here I put a bit of a yellow on the Uranus because that's quite high. We're only we're at 17, so we're only a few out in terms of getting to the out of bounds quality. So is that more subtle, the Uranus? Have you seen anything in terms of the Uranus near out of bounds quality, or?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of family secrets that are still coming out. I mean, our family secrets, the way that they are released is very erratic. And also I'm sure my sister has her own secrets that I don't know about.
Yeah.
The 12 houses is not necessarily locked up like a vault. Things come out of the woodwork for sure.
Wow, that's interesting. And also interesting with the out of bounds Mars, you've got the Mars rule in the fall. So do you think it's got maybe some of that connection there as well, possibly family life or home life?
Yeah, totally.
Wow.
Mars ruling the Mercury as well. So
yeah,
we both kind of always just say whatever it is, and have to take it back later sometimes.
I love it. Wonderful. Well, thank you. I love hearing these stories. Again, it just brings the astrology to life. So I'm going to quickly share my chart. So as you'll see on the screen in terms of declination, I have my moon out of bounds and my Uranus. So yeah, I've been pondering this again when you're learning astrology, and when I was many moons ago, just really, one of those topics that just blow your mind. So again, when I was watching that Stephen Forrest video, I got to the point I was like, I looked at my own declination. I was like, this makes so much sense. The things we were talking about before, like breaking out of social constructs, the borderline, I wouldn't say criminal behavior, but antisocial behavior, like just being in England we call it being a bit cheeky. I don't know what the equivalent would be here in the States. Ornery, I've heard that word before. I don't know if that's widely used, but so sorry, Stevie. Yeah.
Well, your moon is in the 9th, ruling the 10th. So this is also a career trajectory for you as well as an international journey of breaking out. Something that stuck out to me immediately was, let's talk astrology.
Yeah.
So something that's really, I mean, what you've done at Kepler is brought a whole new digital reality to what we do in terms of sharing information and creating a bigger community.
Oh, thank you. Those words mean a lot. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And again, that's a good point. I not thought about doing the Let's Talk Astrology. I just, after graduating from Kepler, I just thought, well, let's actually get people on video. Let's not just, you know, we've got the books that we read in classes, all the rest of it. Let's bring people on the video and let's showcase. I love watching, you know, astrology podcasts where people are talking and they're having really in-depth conversations. I love all that. But I got to a point where I was just like, I want to see the visuals. I want to see the receipts. Like, pull up charts on the screen and let's visually tell the story as well, and let's do it. Just have that dynamic. And I know a lot of people do as well, but that's just a kind of a dynamic I wanted to bring to some of these videos. But that's an excellent point. I didn't think of that.
Oh, it's huge. Not only do you do Let's Talk Astrology, but you do several other video series. So as you created our YouTube, basically, or revamped it to a point where it's a new thing that it wasn't before you came along. And it is like very out of bounds.
Yeah, very out of bounds.
To do that. You took us all out of kind of our comfort zone at our school for so long, and brought in this new little monkey wrench to change things up a bit.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I love, you know, in the last 2 years we've built everybody watching now. Like, I love the audience that we have and everybody who comments. And also at the end of this video, I'd love to hear, you know, me and Stevie are talking about our out of bounds experience, but I'd love to hear the stories from the community, because it really just builds and enriches the topics we're talking about when we share these experiences as a community and talk about these topics. That's why I just love, I love the topic, I love the subject, and just love building communities around these kind of subjects. But you also bring another important point there as well about long distance travel. So obviously I'm from England. I lived in Spain for a little bit, and then I moved over to the United States. So it has that overseas quality, that ninth house quality as well. Obviously, as you pointed out, got the moon ruling the midheaven. So before I became besotted by astrology, I was in the caring field. So I've been a counselor, I've worked with children and teenagers with special needs and autism and all these kind of caring fields. And again, when we're talking about out of bounds quality, maybe that love, as you have, Stevie, working with people who may be more ostracized in society, or those who are put or marginalized in some way. So I have my background in political science, so I did a lot of, like you said as well, a lot of protests and being out there, more progressive policies, all the rest of it. So yeah, it's really interesting how what you've been talking about kind of lies into what being an experience for me in my out of bounds qualities, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, and I think what you kind of are showing through every chart example is exactly that. You can take it to the what is perceived as good or bad, but the whole idea is we have to change things in the world around us. We have to drastically do something different in all of these chart examples.
Yeah, I love that point. And again, you're making that point of like, at times in societies, we have to break the status quo, and we have to push and we have to move forward, because it's stuffy. Like, you know, the political scene is now like, we need new ways of thinking, new ways to make the world a better place for the collective and for everybody, rather than the hierarchical, you know, few people and those kind of mentalities. So hopefully in the next 20 years, let's see what goes on. Wonderful. Okay, so we've got just two more chart examples here, and we've got one of my favorite bands of all time, Nirvana. We've got Kurt Cobain. So, Stevie, what are your thoughts on? Are you a fan? Are you a Kurt Cobain fan, or back in the day?
Yeah, I was a little bit of a Nirvana fan back in the day. I love that he has the out of bounds moon. It makes so much sense because he once again is like pictured wearing dresses and doing all of this weird stuff, where he really took his niche, who he was, and kind of brought it to the rest of the world. I think we can see the rulership and the co-presence with exalted Jupiter there, as kind of, no matter how kind of weird, obtuse, dramatic, or even like, devastating his actions were, he was still very buoyant and held up still to this day by a really loyal fan base, and by people who were not only just fans, but they were very touched by his whole story.
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful delineation. And I love how you bring in that Out of Bounds moon there in the 11th. So those groups of people, and talking about extremes, if that's a key word, the extreme emotion. So you listen to the old tracks, and it was just like nothing I'd ever heard before about putting his heart and soul into these lyrics. And it was really, heart on the sleeve type of deal, where there was nothing, he was just putting it all out there. And that, as you said, connected with a wide group of audience of dedicated fans, and that moon there, Out of Bounds, just extreme emotions. I think that's a really good point. And I think as well, like you look at the elements in this chart, there's so much water. I mean, what have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 planets in water. So a part of me as well just thinks, you include the Out of Bounds moon and the extreme emotions, that Mercury detriment, the opposite, the Pluto, that extra element of intensity. You got Uranus on the ascendant along with Pluto. But again, that water for me is almost like he drowned in his own emotions in the end. And maybe that lack of air, that lack of ability to see, being a bit objective, to pull himself out of those maybe deeper, darker times, which again was another sad ending.
That's a really good point. And I think it's, there's not a lot of, except for the 1/7, hard aspects. There's no hard aspects to the moon. So it's almost like there is a level of just, it was too easy to get lost in that extreme. There was nothing stopping it from happening or pushing up against it in that sense. So yeah, he got pulled out to sea in a way.
I love that. That's a really interesting observation. So the ease of the aspects of the moon. So a lot of people think when they're looking at charts, they're looking for the hard oppositions and the squares, which of course have a factor. But I love that expression that just because we have the nice easy sextiles or trines or whatever's going on here doesn't necessarily mean a positive outcome in that sense. And I like what you're saying there, maybe getting too carried away and swept out to sea in terms of how that manifested. I think that's a really good point in this chart. Okie dokie, on to our final, Albert Einstein. So obviously we know Stephen Forrest talked about the genius quality, and Albert Einstein is synonymous with the word genius. So any thoughts, Stevie, on this last chart?
Yeah, his Out of Bounds moon rules his ascendant. So yeah, we just see him I think we all see him so differently than he probably saw himself. He just probably thought, I'm just curious and interested. And everyone else in the world is like, this man is a genius. And, he's got an element named after him. And yeah, it's just that I think I wonder too, he just taught himself. He was so self-led that it's hard to believe that he could really see the impact of his own behavior, but we can see it really clearly with the moon ruling the ascendant, and trining the 10th house stuff up there.
Those are really excellent points, and I think that again the Out of Bounds quality of breaking out of social constructs, or I think maybe for his time that maybe we talk about the status quo of the time, like thinking in certain ways, but he came out and said, I'm nothing special. I just have this insatiable curiosity, maybe that Sagittarius moon, and just to delve into these concepts and to go out of the bounds of the established wisdom at the time, and to go to beyond that and say, let's think about things differently. And he really did have a different way. And of course, maybe that Mercury Saturn maybe could put those ideas maybe into more concrete, in more of a concrete level. But it's quite interesting in Holstein, at least, got that moon in the 6th. So literally, Out of Bounds worked himself to death. I think literally at the end, if you see his desk the day he died, I think it was still full of different equations, and I don't know what other things were going on.
Yeah, I did. I read that he was working in the hospital basically. Yeah, he just did, and he just did so much. He moved around so much. He taught in so many places, was involved in so many group efforts on different projects. So he really is, I think that the Sag quality really shines for his Out of Bounds Moons. It's all about the greater information, being a bridge, and like you said, putting that into something more concrete, something that you can put on paper, something that you can show. And his Saturn is debilitated, yet he did break a lot of preconceptions with his thinking. So what his Saturn does there is definitely trine by sign to the moon, and it's, I think, affected, especially Venus being there too, because we know he was a bit of a philanderer as well. But he definitely broke the structures that, and then replaced the structures that that a lot of people were just like, you know.
Absolutely. Then push the boundaries of, you know, what was accepted, and then new concepts. I think those are some excellent points. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Stevie, so much for, I absolutely love this topic, and thank you for joining me today. I actually want to touch on talking about your Out of Bounds Mars ruling that 11th. You've done some fantastic work in terms of the AstroTrivia shows we put on in the last year or so. So would you like to explain maybe the dates of, I don't know if you've got it set in stone, the dates are coming up, maybe explain AstroTrivia, what it's about, and when people can look out to maybe to sign up and all those kind of things?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun talking to you. The AstroTrivia is a Jeopardy-based kind of game show that we've hosted twice so far at Kepler. We have 3 contestants and a lot of questions. We have raffles with amazing prizes. All of the proceeds go to supporting our student God, I'm losing the
Scholarships
word.
and
Yeah, our scholarship program. So we do a couple different scholarship types. The proceeds go to the students. It's going to be October 29th at 10 a.m. You'll see more coming out in early October. You can buy raffle tickets, and you also get to participate and guess the questions in the chat room while we're presenting, which is really fun as well.
It really is such a brilliant game show. We've got some excellent guests as well. I think, do we have Nadia Shaw presenting for this one as well?
Nadia Shaw hosts.
Hosting.
And, we generally have, I think, 1 staff member participating and 1 or 2 staff members, and then we also have a raffle for the 3rd participant. So if you are an astro genius, then you definitely want to look out. We will probably be doing what we did last time, which is raffling off a 3rd contestant participant. So if you're an astro sleuth and you want to compete with the heavy hitters, definitely.
And it's not, you know, I've watched those aren't easy questions. Well, some of them maybe, but you've picked some absolutely fantastic questions in the whole categories that you do.
And definitely look out for the categories, as they do correlate to courses that we offer. So you'll get a little taste of what's to come if you join us in studying at Kepler as well.
Absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So what I'll do in this video for everybody watching, we have actually a playlist, the AstroTrivia playlist. I'll put the link in the video description below, and probably some pop-ups. Then once we get the link for the main one on October 29th, for the next AstroTrivia, we'll put a link back in the description, and we'll talk more about that. But you can't miss these game shows. They're absolutely fantastic. So I have to sit there and like, some of the questions are so difficult. I'm like, what is it? And I'm like looking at my phone and stuff, but that's cheating. So I can't do that. That's out of bounds. Can't cheat.
That's great. But that's my Mars Out of Bounds too. Yeah, it's like, I love competing. I love games. I love trash talking, table talking. So, you know, it's a really, really fun game for me to set up as an Out of Bounds Mars person myself.
And again, talking about contributions to KeplerCollege, you've brought so much, not only in terms of teaching students, but the conceptions of these game shows, absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much. And I love them. Absolutely. So, okay, last thing, do you have any, outside of Kepler, do you have any particular social media sites that you can want to be followed at, or websites, or how can people find you?
You can find me at wilderastrology.com. That's my website.
Say that again, Wilder, or?
Wilder, yeah.
Wilder, okay.
Mars Out of Bounds. I'm not just
Wilder, there you go,
Wilderastrology.
wilderastrology.com.
I don't know, man. So find me there, wilderastrology.com. Find me in 103 Fundamentals at Kepler. And Twitter, I am at Cosmics Comics.
Cosmics
so it's
Comics.
Kind of a mouthful.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Wonderful. So go and follow
Thank you so
Stevie
much,
and check that out.
Thanks for having me, man.
Well, thank you everybody for watching. And again, I want to hear your stories. If you want to post them in the comments below, I'd love to hear your stories. And again, thank you, Stevie, so much for sharing your experiences in terms of Out of Bounds planets. And hope to have you again for another episode soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Stevie. Goodbye, everybody. Cheers.